There's all sorts of playtime stuff and like that. That's just not what's going on here.
Okay. How many banks do you think particularly are going to survive this? I was told that it's going to be there's going to be a handful of banks left when this is all said and done.
Sorry, I'm just ordering a coffee here. You're talking about a consolidation within the banking operations. So,
do you think the BRICS nation at this point cause a major threat to the U.S. dollar and the stability of many regions, et cetera?
Well, let me go there. So, a moment ago, I was explaining to you why Russia is trying to, do this massive push.
But before we get started, folks, make sure you hit the pause button. Okay, go down below. There's a Rumble link. Go over to Rumble and follow us over there. QFS1776.com is, without question, the holy grail of what's to come. Okay, T-shirts. You got to get yourself decorated. This way people will ask you, what is XRP? What is the quantum financial system? What is this? What is that? And you send them where? To QFS1776.com, where they need to immerse themselves, because we're going to burn down this system down to the ground. And out of the ashes will rise the phoenix. There'll be nothing to go back to. Believe me when I tell you that. Unified TV will take over Netflix. We're bringing in the next genre of movie producers and storytellers and actors and actresses. And we're telling the story of how the world is going to be on earth as it is in heaven. Jasara Nasara is coming. Don't make no mistake about it. Gold and silver right down below. Promo code Mel Carmine. Make sure you use the promo code. Almost $8 billion in sales. We're direct to like a bunch of mints. We are the ones that can get you the gold and silver directly to your door, okay, at the cheapest price. Don't even waste your time looking for a cheaper price. It doesn't exist. Also, our Telegram groups down below. If you want to learn what's coming and you're sort of a little scared, I understand. Believe me, I was there too at one point. Our Patriots are literally waiting for you in the room. And if you need more than $10,000 worth of XRP or $1 million worth of XRP, you come see me. Send me an email at QFS1776@gmail, and we'll get you as much as you want. Well, good evening, folks. We got the one and only, you could tell from the steering wheel, we are with the one and only Juan O Savin. And I got to tell you, he said that, basically the fact that, I reached out to him, he reached out to me. I said, hey, let's do a show. Obviously, there's some good stuff coming down the pike, which is important for him to really get on as many podcasts as possible at this point to get the message out. And he likes the variety, the flavors out there with different podcasters, bringing a different perspective, asking questions maybe a little bit different, like the pizza guy, etc. But before we get started, folks, Dr. Sandra Michael Rose is coming to Cape Canaveral, 166 Center Street, the inventor of the scalar wave technology, which is allowing the body to heal the body of all kinds of things, is going to be in the flesh the 21st of January at my location. And there's room for about 217 chairs, exactly that number. Can you imagine? Juan, I know there's got to be a lot of stuff cooking, brother. There's got to be some stuff in the pipeline that we don't know about. And we know that you come in and out of Mar-a-Lago quite a lot. I know you're in Hawaii right now. What is front and center? What's cooking? Are we close to that nuclear scare, whatever you want to call it, moment?
Well, I think I don't want to sound sensationalistic. That is something that is there, that is looming out there, that people should be aware that this is not a trifling conversation when you throw that around. It's like saying Nazi or something like that. We don't want to be crying wolf,
right?
And we'll lose a lot of people if in fact we are crying wolf or perceived as crying wolf. You could be right on the information, wrong on the sudden you've way. So let me just address that specific one because you raised it. Is there a nuclear component that we should be concerned about right now? One of the things that just happened the other day, 2 days before New Year's, there was a Russian general doing a rather benign interview. And then at the very end of the interview, he throws an Easter egg in there. And by the way, the Israelis used a missile delivered, nuclear tipped missile in Beirut to blow up Beirut Harbor. And the US and the French covered that up. Now, I've spoken about this previously. What the deal is that aluminum or that fertilizer nitrogen oxide that was stored there. It was, Russian in origin, didn't have the right paperwork, got pulled back, been sitting there for almost a decade in the dispute over whether it had the right delivery papers, et cetera. And so it's there at the port. Well, it was convenient because that was the precursor material that was used to make the rocket fuel for all of these that were being delivered into Lebanon. You have to understand when Iran sends these rocket components around, they don't send them the fuel. The fuel is hard to maneuver and move around. And so the contention is that they had a refinement facility there in the port. And so Israel, of course, knowing there's a missile threat that's, the fuel's being sent out by the truckload from that location, they destroyed both the refinement facility, a German facility that was, components that was underground there, and then the material up on top. And this fertilizer, similar to what was used allegedly was used at Oklahoma City. So, and when you look at the videos, you see there's a hard blast, a very high rate of detonation blast, and then there's a soft blast, which is the fertilizer, which is a slower developing cloud. The fertilizer material doesn't have a rapid rate of detonation, and so it has to have oxygen to feed the flame front. With that in mind, here this Russian general throws this comment in how it's an Israeli nuclear tipped missile that blew apart that port, that killed thousands, destroyed this location in Lebanon. That was the fifth time, depending on who you're talking to, that Israel has used what we call an ultra low residue nuclear device. They're compact. They don't put a lot of nuclear material out because they're extremely efficient and compact. There was 4 times they used something similar, not missile delivered, but drone delivered in Syria about a decade ago. And after the 4th time, which was an airburst weapon to knock out a bunch of these missiles coming into Lebanon from Iran, was a daytime airburst over the site. And a lot of people commented, yeah, that was an airfield bomb or something like that. Obama outed that incident as a submarine launched drone. And others came out and said, yeah, that was a ultra low residue nuclear device that was used there, airburst over the target. You can see by the way that it exploded what was going on. So anyway, that's been out there in contention. So depending on listen to and all the various arguments, that would make Beirut the 5th time that one of these types of devices was used. You would, it would fall in the category of a tactical. Now, at this exact moment, several days ago, Putin called an emergency meeting of political and military persons for an emergency meeting. This was after a couple of days of intense bombing in Ukraine, air bomb, an aerial attack. by, most of the people out there following this stuff, this was cleanup. They're going in and getting all those locations that they haven't gotten thus far. And you have to understand, within the Russian population, the Russian people, they're not happy with Putin because he hasn't gone hard enough in Ukraine. Rather than losing thousands and thousands of Russian lives and injuries and equipment, their attitude in Russia, they're so done in dealing with Ukraine that they just want just go in and nuke the whole place, just turn it to glass, be done with it. And Putin hasn't done that because to go too hard, too strong, would have invited a NATO response, would have played into these globalistas who want a overreaction, if you will, depending on who's doing the talking, against what Russia did in Ukraine. So pretty measured. He went in and he dealt with the 54 biolabs that were targeting the Russian population with genetic weapons. It's like a bad James Bond movie. Okay, that's what they went in and dealt with right off the bat. Then they also took care of Chernobyl because they were concerned about nuclear residue from the Chernobyl site being used in some type of a dirty bomb. So they dealt with that. And then there was a nuclear reactor that people at the reactor reported to the International Atomic Energy Administration over at the UN that plans in place to make that reactor melt down. And so Russia sent troops, specialists, spetsnaz, in to secure that reactor to keep them from doing a meltdown that could have affected people across Central Europe. Russia's been being pretty measured in their response to keep the U.S. and NATO from having an excuse to go in and do something more catastrophic, extreme, whatever way you want to say it. When you then look at the situation where you have a Russian general talking about Israel using a nuke, in fact, the background conversation that's not in the public side, that's the fifth one. Once more and you're done, we won't tolerate it. What Russia's going to do, most likely in the next 30 days, they're going to fall back to a defensible line, try to pull back from Ukraine. There's no more real win for Russia in the Ukraine. They've accomplished most of what they could accomplish there. Then they'll just play whack-a-mole. If something pops up and it's a problem, they'll go in and deal with it. They won't tolerate anything. If any type of an action originating out of Ukraine or within the region, further tampering with the relative stability that they're going to have at this point in time, a standoff, if you will, they're going to give the same message as Strategic Command did here in the United States. Shortly after Biden took office, a few months later, while the question of who had control of the nuclear keys, a strange couple of circumstances happened. First, there was a bizarre number of letters and symbols that was transmitted, put on the Strategic Command official website. And people went to the internet and ran those letters and numbers, and it came back as if this was a coded message, the message would be Q vindicated or something like that. I can't remember the exact word that was used. And so people were like, oh my gosh, well, the clearance you need to work in those secure facilities that handle nuclear and beyond is a Q clearance. So that was kind of bizarre, but it was plausible denial. few minutes after that was posted, then they came on and said, hey, one of the workers took home a communications device and it was sitting on a table, and a small child got a hold of it and punched in random letters, ignore the last message. Well, people were like, yeah, right. That's plausible. And then remember that a lot of these sites that do the decrypting messages, which is what that site was that people went to, the first one on the internet, when they applied that decryption technology, it came up with this, Q message. Well, those guys kind of run a lot of those sites covertly. So out to the world, other governments that follow all this stuff and monitor each other's sites, this was like, yeah, something's up here, and they put that in. Then a short time later, on the same site, now everybody's kind of paying attention. There comes an unsolicited message that says, if a force is about to be overrun and use of conventional weaponry will not deter, use of tactical nukes is authorized. No further explanation, no further qualification. It just goes on the site. That's the statement, done, once and over. Anybody reading that, Russia, China, Korea, anybody else looking at this would interpret that as we're just letting you know, we don't have to wait for authorization from anybody. We've already got it. If our forces are about to be overrun anywhere, use of tactical nukes is already authorized. Now, the context was, when that was posted, Russia was doing the largest military war games practice that they had ever done since World War II, right on the border of Ukraine. And a little over 6 months later, they invaded Ukraine. But it was a clear message. You can go to a certain point, but if you're going to overrun a line into Central Europe, we're here. We're not putting up with it. Now, all of that explanation to say that Russia, should they choose to fall back to a defensible line and enforce a buffer, which Ukraine always was a buffer, but if they decide to enforce some buffer, military buffer to protect the Donbass region where Russian citizens and historic Russian people reside in the Crimea and all that. If they decide to fall back to that position somewhere after the next month elapses as they do this final push for cleanup, then they almost certainly will virtually word for word mimic what was said in our strategic command location. Should anything come out of NATO, out of Ukraine, out of the West, that threatens to overrun these positions where Russia falls back to a particular line, use of tactical nukes is authorized, because Putin has his own health issues going on. Is there a transfer of power coming in Russia? Is there some type of drama? Now that Putin's called this special meeting, what are they getting ready for and trying to, prepare for in this changeup? Belarus, just simultaneously here at the end of the year, it was announced that Belarus now has everything that was promised to them in order to operate their nuclear deterrent, which Putin gave to Belarus starting about a year ago. So they now have it all. They've got the components, the keys, the support, the technical personnel, everything to maintain their nuclear deterrent out of Belarus with tactical nuclear weapons. And by the way, just so people understand, for those that aren't, big military people or whatever, tactical just means it's a more, it's a smaller type of a weapon. It's much more precise. It's not designed to blow up a whole city. It's not a city buster or something like that. It's take out a submarine at sea, take out a specific base or location, as opposed to blow up a state or something like that. It's more of a surgical instrument, if you will. And So with all of that in mind, the the chessboard is starting to firm up as to what these last moves begin to look like as the game consolidates in this 5D chess. Is that clicking for you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a dereliction of duty in some segments of our army? Because this thing is dragging on a lot longer than it should have, and I think you'll agree with that. Is there people that
Well,
don't want?
hold on. Which thing is that? You're saying that the curative action to stop the here in America in the and Trump out of office, etc., that it's taking longer than it should. That's what you're referencing. Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
I'd say that's wrong. But go ahead. Let me hear your way of saying it, and I'll
Yeah,
respond to it. I apologize, but I wanted the listeners to know. Let's be precise in what we're asserting, addressing, whatever, and so there can be no question. What's the thing? Trump isn't back in office, and it should have been done a long time ago. And what the hell's the problem? So go
I
ahead.
think yeah, I think it has a lot to do. And you remember Kim Clement, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kim Clement, in one of his sermons, one of his prophecies, clearly states the Iraqi dinar, which has got to do with the revaluation of wealth and this new world that nobody really knows what it really looks like, including myself. We can all be a bunch of speculators and speculate as to how we think it's going to all go down and how the dust is going to settle. But at the end of the day, nobody really truly knows precisely. It's going to be fun to see how much of it we get right and how much we get wrong. But I think it has to do with this BRICS nation and the Iraqi dinar and the reevaluation. Jassara, as you say, may be something completely different, and it might be. They may even call it a different name for all we know. Does it have to do with that? Is there a struggle that is maybe controlled by J.P. Morgan that we don't see, just like they were able to be instrumental in slapping the lawsuit against Ripple to slow the whole thing down because they realized their central bank digital currency is never going to work?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those precise terms. I'm certainly very familiar with people, speculating that that's what's really going on here. Um, I don't know that I buy into that precisely, and the reason is because at its most fundamental level, all the sides, not just both, there's several parties involved here with separate interests, military, industrial, um, nation state, financial. There's a lot of players. You can't tell the players without a program, and they have varied interests over which group within all these subsets wins. And so there is a lot of playing back and forth, but there's also lots of options in play. That's why in a chess game, you start out with a multitude of options. And as the chess game goes on, you have less and less, fewer options the longer the game goes, until you're down to just a couple of moves potentially each in order to lock in a final outcome. But along the way, there's lots of options in there. So the question is, which option gets played, which option gets held back, but is still on the table, available, just isn't played that particular move, and which options come into being because of the other players' moves, and which ones go away. It is a game of attrition. We're going through that attrition mode where options that looked like they were viable, plays that looked like they were going to happen, become more obvious or less obvious. And there may have been some accuracy in identifying a lot of these options, but to say that anybody knew with exacting precision, short of God himself, exactly how this was going to play out, I think is a total falsehood. There's an end game, certainly, that's in play, which is take the kings. Chess at multiple levels is not just one. And so there's multiple key places that all have to be taken before the game is over. And you can take a king and it's not over. You got several more to go on both sides. So in that end game, most of the time when you're dealing at the nation state level, it's similar to what happened with Russia. We took them out on their income producing portion of their economy, which was the oil and gas sector. We brought the price of oil and gas down so low that they couldn't pump it out of the ground. Their costs were so high compared to what we could get out of Saudi Arabia, et cetera. So we brought the cost of fuel down, and we deprived them of this hard money coming in from outside the country. We showed that their weapons were not as good as they portrayed them to be in Afghanistan and in South America, with multiple different efforts that made them, we pantsed them, if you will. And that made it hard for them to sell military equipment anywhere in the world during that period. We attacked them on the morality, the church. We had the Pope over there in Poland, and most people look at the trade unions in Poland and say that that was what caused with Lech Walesa and all of those operations as being the key to the satellite countries going against the Soviet Union. But the reality is it was a religious thing, much more so, and led both from the Jewish side. You had this huge migration of Jews to Israel and to other parts of the world. Largest population in Israel is Russian Jews, okay, at this point in time, which, by the way, gives them a reason to come down and be involved in the Mideast, including with Israel. And a lot of people don't know, Russia spent a significant period of time in one of the kibbutz there in Israel, living in Israel for a period of time and being familiarized as a young man early in his career over at KGB. And so he's very familiar with that region, knows it better than most people do from the inside out. The mentality, the defensive logic, etc. Then finally, after all of those things, including we declared war on Russia with SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, if you will. We challenged them to an arms race. We said, okay, we're going from the Jimmy Carter, we can't keep 250 boats floating in the Navy saying we have 350 and they're rusting into the water line. No fuel to train or do anything. Reagan came in and said, we're going to build a 500-ship Navy. Hell, we'll make it 600. Brought out the Missouri and the New Jersey from mothballs, revamped them and sent them out there, to just get every ship possible as quickly as possible into the fray. Russia tried to keep up with this. We had the military-industrial monster, the United States, and everybody we could marshal around us. And Russia couldn't keep up with us, couldn't keep up on pricing, couldn't keep up on technology. Prior to that, during the Carter era, the Russians were going to the moon with particle beam weapons. And we were way behind them. By the time we got done with SDI, they weren't even on the map in many ways. But the final straw in all of that was the ruble. And it took about 3 years to do the setup on the ruble to get it to the right points, actually almost 4. But by the time you figure a startup period before it really got going in earnest, it was about 3 years. And then when the end game came, it was literally months. We were able to drive the value of the ruble down. No counterfeiting involved, by the way. There was a couple people used to say we counterfeited the rubles. We didn't touch it. No chance, not a prayer. Didn't violate international law or agreements. We just created a market for rubles outside the Soviet Union and then sent them back. And it destabilized the ruble, drove it in value from 40 rubles to the dollar to about 200 rubles to the dollar, headed for 600 rubles to the dollar if Gorbachev hadn't called Bush and capitulated and asked for terms of surrender. And Bush says, well, Reagan said, tear down that wall. I see the wall still standing. Within 4 hours of the phone call to Bush by Gorbachev, the guards were leaving the guard towers and the wall came tumbling down. That was it. And the ruble, then we stopped the destabilization process almost instantaneously and began to work with them to, work through how they were going to bring things back stable. Unfortunately, some of the people involved were not, didn't do what was originally mapped and planned and extorted what was left of the Soviet Union, worked with the KGB and others to create the oligarchs, and Russia went into a decade of horror. It's tough. It's the way it is. All of that explanation to help your listeners understand that something similar is the way that you go in to take down nation states. When you get to the currency, that's usually the last straw. So when we start talking currency, the way you transact across a nation, keep business going. If there's any nation on the planet that's vulnerable to that, it is the United States, because the business of America is what? Business.
Money.
If you screw up the ability to do transactions, you shut down whole industries, you pause them, you cause people, literally, you want to kill a bunch of grandmas, you cut off the cash flow. And you can't work your bank machine, and the credit card doesn't work at Staples or Walmart, and the country isn't working. We're in deep shit, and it can happen very, very quickly. So the threat of something happening within the monetary markets, the banking industry, the currency, and international trade, all different lanes, by the way, they are not the same, is a huge threat to the stability of the United States and the West.
Does the Galactic Federation play a major part in this change of the guard as we make the final chess move?
No. I'm sorry. It's not. There's all sorts of playtime stuff and like that. That's just not what's going on here.
Okay. How many banks do you think particularly are going to survive this? I was told that it's going to be there's going to be a handful of banks left when this is all said and done.
Sorry, I'm just ordering coffee here. You're talking about a consolidation within the banking operations. So it's not so much that banking is stopped, it's that it gets wound back fairly dramatically. If these people get their way that we're fighting, we have a handful of banks left over able to transact and operate across the country. And the smaller regional banks end up having to fall back and allow themselves to be absorbed by these bigger banks, sucked into their operations. That's a very dangerous thing. Anytime you centralize anything, you become more vulnerable, not less vulnerable. The logic is that by just having a few main players that we're going to be safer because they're all big. The reality is you eliminate competition, and wherever things are highly centralized, you create a location for tyrants to rule and reign and exist. It might start out all benign and lovey-dovey, but it turns to a tyranny fairly quickly. And within the monetary and banking community, that's as great a threat as anything that you can imagine to the American way of life.
Do you think the BRICS nation at this point cause a major threat to the US dollar and the stability of many regions, et cetera?
Well, let me go there. So a moment ago, I was explaining to you why Russia is trying to, do this massive push prior to going into a not a defensive mode. That would be a totally inaccurate way to state it, but not pushing. They don't want to occupy Ukraine. They want to. They're done with it. They fall back, and then they just have a buffer. And anybody pops their head up, wants to do any mischief, cause a problem. Thank you. They'll deal with it, but they're really trying to clear the decks so they can put their attention elsewhere. Well, where else would they put it? Part of the issue that's going on this very second, right now, is that in Yemen, you have all sorts of activity going on there that Iran is backing. Russia's backing Iran. China's backing Iran. Russia is very concerned that Iran would get into any kind of trouble. Iran is backing Yemen in a lot of the mischief that's going on out there. Just the other day, at the closeout of the year, several Mideastern states that have used the dollar as their reserve currency and also have used the dollar in order to denominate oil trade and transactions, oil and gas, announced that they're switching over to the BRICS currency. And this was viewed as a very big threat to this Western control, autonomy, involvement in the Mideast. If you now have them going over to the BRICS currencies, which then means it's not the dollar, does the dollar get damaged horribly? And in fact, when I was in East Africa the other day and we were talking on some of these things, the reality is that there's this concern. You know, the dollar was backed by oil when we left the gold standard. It actually makes a certain level of sense because oil does work. It's constructive, it's creative. Oil, gas make the world go round in this era of civilization. The world turns on energy. If you take that low-cost Mideast oil out of the equation, how would you replace that? How would you go from a gold back to an oil back, from an oil back to what? If they're not going to use the dollar, and by extension, the American State Department, military, etc., to protect the free transit of that fuel. See, when they switched to an oil-backed dollar, the trade-off was they transact in dollars for oil transactions. Then, anywhere somebody comes to blow one of their ships up, cause a problem, disrupt a supply line, the American Navy, the American military in a broader sense, and our diplomatic corps and forces would come in and deal with them appropriately to stop any mischief that would damage the free flow of energy, which then you're getting protected by our military to do what you're doing. With that in mind, who's going to protect them if they switch to a BRICS currency? Well, the idea is India going to step in there? Yeah, they've got an incredible military. Is Russia? Is Britain? Is Brazil? Who's involved in this? What countries are going to provide the security of oil transit for those currencies those countries that switch to a BRICS currency as their medium of trade between them and the rest of the world? The reality is,
guys, if you're watching this interview with Juan O Savin, it definitely picks up a lot of speed as we go into the final turn, the final curve, if you will, of epic things happening on planet Earth. But before we go any further, folks, a reminder, January 21st, you got Dr. Sandra Michael Rose in the flesh. She's going to be at 166 Center Street at stayingalive.com. The tickets for sale down below. Okay. Also, as a special guest, we have Lily Botches. She wrote the book called Awakening the Holographic Human. And Ian Farrar starts us off with great nutrition, the highest level of organic that you can imagine, because the cornerstone of good health, folks, always starts with great nutrition and a great mindset and great spirituality. Don't forget, January 21st, be there. Tickets are going fast as we speed up close to this event. And if you want your tickets, you better book it now. There's only 217 chairs. Thank you.
The reality is that's a bet against America being viable and a strong man moving forward. It's a vote to say that the Biden crowd is so weak, that Washington, D.C., that America is so, lost its way, that nobody can trust it as a protective big brother, strongman partner. Therefore, in the interest of self-preservation, they're going to somebody else that can protect them. It's also a statement that they don't see America getting it back under control in the foreseeable future. So they're picking a lane. Now, my response to that, and to your listeners, you're going to have to make the same decision. How are you going to denominate your life energy? Are you going to denominate it in dots and tittles on a computer screen? Are you going to denominate it in paper presidents folded in your pocket? Are you going to denominate it in politician-backed quatlus that you get for your retirement income somewhere down the road, or from the stock exchange, etc.? Are you going to stick with that game? The reality is that's a loser also, maybe even more of a loser. So where are you going to protect yourself? My statement to your audience is this. Yes, America is in deep shit, and we are challenged on every front. Please consider also that while you're getting press and news reports of how dire our situation is, and it's going to get worse, going to get much worse, it'll be a near-death experience for America before this is over. Still, even then, go to those countries that claim that they're more secure, even bundled together. Go to any one of those countries and actually walk the streets, talk to business people, talk to the politicians. Are they more stable than America is even now? And I'm going to tell you they are not. It is a illusion, a facade by globalista to make you think that they're more stable, stronger, safer than we are here in America. If America is coming back, as I explained repeatedly to all of these audiences, if you're about to see a comeback like the world has never seen, certainly in modern history and maybe ever, a clearing of the decks, a cleaning of the house, both in the political sense and way that our politicians operate on, but also in the spiritual world, a pushback against the evil and the insanity. Hell is a place where reason does not exist. Try reasoning your way out of hell. Okay. So in this moment that we're about to come into, when we get our wits together, when we find our way back, when we fight our way back with the help of those that have anticipated this and engineered a retort that will be coming over the next period of time, that ultimately will be several years, but the real pushback starts right now. As that happens, I'm telling you, don't bet against America, and don't bet against what will be of the reinvigorated, reincorporated dollar, if you will. And I shouldn't use incorporated, because people with the incorporation stuff with the states and the feds and all that go crazy. But there is a certain nature of contractually as to what's going to be done with the dollar, so that there is a resurgence that isn't controlled by these globalists or internationalists. It goes back to a constitutional sense, resource-based. I don't want to get into that because I don't think it's appropriate for this exact moment, but there is a solution in play.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I would, in a generic sense, bet on America. I would bet on the American people. I would bet on the American industrial mentality, the education. Does that mean that we are not going to have problems? You cannot go off the rails like we have at the universities. You cannot go off the rails like we have in stopping the invasion at the borders. 10 million people on the low side